Hello everyone, welcome to week 6. In this session we're going to be looking closely at task groups and what they are and what happens in task groups, and also we're going to have an overview of looking at how to deal with conflict, which is a normal part of group work. I'm actually having a look at the PowerPoint slides if you want to follow them on LearnLine. One of the things that stands out about task groups, as has already been discussed, is that they are about action, they're about management or bringing about some change, and they're very much focused on making decisions. They're always focused on issues that they're there to address rather than on individuals' personal circumstances or issues or problems. So they're not about therapeutic groups. They're about looking at solutions to organisational issues, and they're about generating new ideas and getting things done, as the term task suggests. They can be organised to serve 3 different purposes or 3 different groups. I'm looking at slide 4. They can be organised, task groups can be organised around meeting the needs of clients, around meeting organisational needs, or around meeting community needs. Firstly, we're going to have a look in a little more detail at what do we mean by meeting client needs. The purpose of these task groups would be ultimately focused on addressing the needs of people who are coming to services for either counselling or for other group purposes. And those meetings will take place often at a health service or at a clinic, and it might be, for example, where a multidisciplinary team gets together to talk about the issues and the needs of their clients. It could also be allied health teams, so a group of different professionals getting together in a health service setting to talk about client needs. Or it could be treatment or case conferences where workers or therapists or counsellors, community workers, caseworkers get together to talk about specific individual cases. So it may be that people come together and one worker presents the way in which they're actually working with a particular person's therapeutic needs and have a conversation about that with their colleagues. That would be called a case conference. Also, staff development groups in an organisation can also be linked to client needs. So, for example, staff may get together to have a meeting around looking at a particular practice in relation to meeting their clients' needs. So they may be having a meeting around how do we use narrative practices, for example, in our counselling service, but it's actually around being focused on the client's needs. There can also be interagency groups where workers from different organisations may actually come together to speak about some clients that they have in common. So, for example, a housing service may meet together with a medical service, or may meet together with someone from the department a government department that has a shared concern or interest in a particular client's needs or issues. When we're talking about meeting organisational needs, the sorts of meetings or groups that will occur to do this will be committees or cabinets or boards of directors. Sometimes they might be called a steering committee. I'm looking at slide 7 now, and when we're talking about meeting community needs, some of the types of groups that you might have heard of in relation to community needs might be social action groups. It might be community building groups, such as a neighbourhood group that is formed to address a particular community need, a coalition, or a delegate council that has representatives from different areas or different parts of the community, or a collective where people have come together around a particular issue. On slide 8, just having a look here at what some of the examples might be of organisational meetings. One of the things that we know about working in organisations is that there are a lot of meetings, and as a human service worker, a humanitarian worker, a social worker, a case worker, people very quickly can become despondent and discouraged by the number of meetings that they're expected to attend in their workplace. Organisations have lots of meetings. One of the things I want to highlight in this seminar is how meetings can actually be used to be a tool for people to generate ideas and to be creative, and that unfortunately many of us have had experiences where meetings are not run well and are not run effectively. But some of the examples of organisational meetings can be the morning greeting. Some organisations might have a very simple stand-up, energetic meeting where people stand up and speak to each other and talk about their goals for the day, greet each other. It's called a round robin, when everyone goes around the group or around the room and just says really quickly what they want to say. Team meetings are a regular meeting that occurs in an organisation where people who are working in the same structural team will get together and have meetings. Often those meetings are to talk about organisational issues, about plans, about what some of the themes are in the workers' work, some of the things that are happening in the community. They usually follow an agenda. A network meeting can also be another example of how in organisations people might actually come together from a number of different organisations and meet together to talk about key issues. Planning meetings are a common way that people get together in an organisation to talk about and go through a planning process of looking at the future, looking at their goals, looking at the direction of the team, for example, and what going to be the priorities for that team over the next year and how are they going to reach those. I'm talking about all of these quite briefly, but in the whole area of planning, for example, again, there's a lot of literature and there's a lot of work and a lot of expertise that people have specifically around that area of planning. But it's another example of kind of meeting that organisations might have. The next slide I'm putting up is slide number 9, and it's has the word laugh on it. And one of the things that we all lose sight of is the ability to use humour and to use lightness in a way that can release energy and encourage people to participate and to want to be part of meetings. Often we have to structure it in because we get very serious in our work, in our study, in our workplace, and especially in meetings. So slide 9 is a reminder that as a worker, one of the things that we can bring to meetings in a positive and a constructive way is the ability to use humour, to involve people and participate, encourage them to participate. Slide 10 is looking at a good meeting. One of the suggestions I would make for you to do is to maybe on a piece of paper write down on one side all of the things that you know about a bad meeting. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us have had experience of attending meetings that have been run really poorly. And one of the challenges for workers is to run meetings, whether it's a community meeting, whether it's a meeting with colleagues, whether it's a meeting, a team meeting. One of our challenges is to run it well. Here are some things that I think are important about how to run a good meeting. A good meeting has clear goals and clear expectations. And these are stated at the outset. You know, the reason that we're here today, the reason that we're having this meeting is to look at the concern about a plan, for example. It's really clear up front what the meeting is about. So people then know why they're there. They know what's going to happen. They know what to expect. Hopefully they're at the right meeting for the right reason. A good meeting has energy, and I guess that's also encouraged by the attitude and the approach of the person facilitating it, leading it, that they're energetic about it, they're showing that they're positive, that they want to be there, that they think the meeting is really important. Good meeting can also be fun. And there are ways that as group leaders and group facilitators, we can bring some small and really simple activities or questions or ways of getting people to speak to each other that actually can be fun and can be energetic. A good meeting keeps to time. It starts on time and it finishes on time. If we say that the meeting is going to go for an hour and a half, the meeting should go for an hour and a half and not for 2.5 hours. A good meeting keeps moving. So the facilitator or the group leader makes sure that nobody hogs the airspace. In other words, that nobody speaks for too long. And that includes the group leader or the facilitator. If the group leader is speaking most of the time, you could imagine what that will do to the rest of the participants in the group. They won't feel like contributing and possibly they'll go to sleep. So a good leader is committed to running a good meeting by keeping it moving so that things don't get stuck. Also, a good meeting is going to have processes that share the decision making so that people know that there's going to be some outcomes from the meeting. They know that there's going to be opportunity for them to have input into making the decisions, and they know that they're going to be able to express themselves and to contribute their own views. I think it's a really big responsibility that workers have to run good meetings, and there's a lot of literature again around group dynamics and how to run a good meeting, and we will speak about this a little further in the rest of this unit. So the worker's role in task groups. What's the worker doing? So the worker's role is to model the expected behaviour, the behaviour that the worker wants to see happening in the meeting. They are committed to modelling that. The worker has to be organised, and that means being prepared. That means being there on time. That means being there early. That means setting up the room in the same way that you would do for a treatment group. The worker does a lot of work before the actual group or the meeting begins. The worker is also committed to accomplishing the task. The worker is going to be really clear about the responsibilities of the different people in the group, including being very clear about their own role and what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. For example, if the worker is running the meeting and is leading the meeting, they may also say, I'm going to take some notes, and then I will share those notes with the rest of the group and ask if people want to make additions or check that I've recorded the right comments or the right priorities. So the worker needs to be really clear with the members of the group about what their role is. They'll also summarise, so regularly remind people why they're there and summarise the purpose of the group. Also acknowledging the achievements that the group has already achieved and checking that the goals that the group is committed to, that people are wanting to see done, the tasks that people are setting, checking that they are realistic. And as a group leader or facilitator, the worker's role is to commit to doing other work in between meetings. It doesn't mean that the worker will be doing everything, but often there will be tasks that the worker has to see to for the next meeting to also be successful. There's a couple of slides here, slide 12 and 13, that talk about boards of directors and committees of management or committees of governance. I think the reason for highlighting the role of boards is that often people are really confused about the role of boards, and these two slides highlight the responsibility of a board of directors. Within a non-government organisation, a board of directors has legal and financial responsibility for the conduct of the organisation. The people who are elected onto a board are invited or elected usually because of their expertise or their knowledge or their position in the community. And the board provides counsel and guidance to the management, to the CEO of an organisation. They don't make the decisions about the day-to-day operation of the organisation. That's the CEO and the senior management staff. That's their role. The other functions of a board, they're to see that policies are developed. It doesn't mean that the board develops those policies, but the board may, for example, sign off on policies that senior management with the CEO have developed. The board has responsibility to develop the mission of the organisation and also to develop the short and the long-term goals. They have the responsibility to approve budgets and also to see that the organisation is adhering to its monitoring and its auditing mechanisms. They have the responsibility and the power to hire and fire the CEO. So there's quite clear roles and responsibilities and lines of delegation within the board, a board of management. And that's also reflected in the way that they run their meetings. It's a legal structure. They have a voting process, and they also have legal requirements that bind them to the numbers of people that need to be on the board, the numbers of meetings that they have a year, and also to the requirement to have an annual general meeting. On slide 14, there's a list here of two different agendas. So agendas are really the list. It's the program, it's the outline for how are we going to run this meeting. It means that things are actually written down, that people know and expect that there will be order and that they know how the meeting will run. With, for example, a board meeting, the agenda is quite formal and is quite set. People have particular roles. There is a chairperson, there is a vice chair, there is a minute taker, for example, there's a public officer, there's a treasurer. They're quite specific roles. The way that their meeting is run is quite ordered. So the welcome, acknowledging who's present, having apologies, acknowledging of traditional owners, noticing, recording minutes from the previous meeting, talking about matters that arise from the previous minutes, business arising, then the general business for that current meeting, and then the next meeting. That's an outline of what would be seen as a very typical agenda for a board meeting. However, if a group such as a social action group is meeting, they also are likely to have an agenda. It may not be as formal as the board meeting agenda. However, they will still have some of the same ingredients in that agenda: the welcome, the acknowledgement of traditional owners, a statement of purpose reminding people what the group meeting is about. If people haven't been present before, likely to have introductions and people talk about their role or their interest in that issue. There's likely to be a discussion about the issue, and there's different ways that may be done. might be done through a brainstorm, it might be done through a presentation. In an action group, developing an action plan and a timeline and people taking on tasks is a very likely agenda item. Also setting the time for the next meeting date and when and where that will happen. So agendas are a way of formalising and also keeping a record that the meeting occurred and that there was a sense of order into the meeting. We're just going to have a little look at the moment at conflict. Slide 15 it looks like a storm's brewing if you have a look at that image, and it's really to highlight that conflict will happen in any group that you are part of or that you're running. Conflict's going to happen whether it's acknowledged or not, and often conflict occurs in a group and it remains unacknowledged, but there may be tensions between members of the group. Sometimes it erupts and it's very verbal. People may shout or may actually actively disagree with each other. Conflict can happen in a whole lot of different ways, and it's normal and it's part of every group. One of the things that's useful as a group facilitator and a group leader is to think about and reflect on your own response to conflict. And really, it's impossible to do this work and work with people and work with groups without really thinking about your own response to conflict. And it might start with thinking about, how do I respond to conflict in my own family? We all have different ways of responding to conflict. There's a few prompts on the slide 16 just to encourage you to think in your own time, to think about how you respond to conflict. Are you someone who perhaps runs away and would rather leave the room or pretend you didn't hear when there's conflict? Or are you someone who fires up and likes the challenge and is happy with confrontation? Or are you someone who's a peacemaker, who encourages people to speak to each other and come to a resolution? Or are you someone who likes to offer advice and tell people how they should resolve their differences? How we react personally when someone is angry with us is going to influence how we respond when we're running a group or when we're responsible for leading a group. And it's something that most of us feel a little bit uncomfortable about, and that's really normal. So slide 16 is really for you to reflect really on your own style of handling conflict and think about how might that influence the way that you see and respond to conflict in a group. Slide 17 I'm looking at now is really highlighting that conflict is seen as a natural and it can be a helpful part of group development, and that workers have got a really significant role in assisting the members of the group to see that a difference in opinion, it's not only okay, but it actually can be a good thing. Workers should also really attempt to understand the meaning of the conflict. What I mean by that is sometimes there may be conflict in a group and two people might express a difference of opinion with each other and may argue with each other. Sometimes a conflict might not really be about what they're arguing about, but it might be about something else that's happening. For example, someone might be arguing with another group member just because they think they talk too much, but they don't feel like saying that. So they argue with them about a comment that they've made. So workers need to have an understanding and be curious about what the meaning behind the conflict is. The worker also has the responsibility to contain the conflict. That doesn't mean that the worker should squash the conflict, but as a worker, as a facilitator, there's a responsibility to model how conflict is handled and responded to, and provide ways for group members to talk about the conflict and to acknowledge it. So encouraging people to explore conflict, to make comment about where it's appropriate, conflict between members, and dealing with that is really important. And the way that the group leader or facilitator does that without becoming angry themselves is really important. It can also be an opportunity for the group leader to remind people about the rules. And we have spoken about group rules and group agreements in any group, and in a treatment group or a task group, they're equally relevant. That there's a standard, I guess, in how a meeting is conducted or how the group is conducted, and one of the fundamental rules should be that there's no physical or verbal abuse. So reminding people about that can be one of the roles that the group leader takes. Setting up decision-making options if the way for the conflict to be resolved is to make a decision and to talk it through. That's the role of the group leader. Offering opportunities for people in the meeting or in the group to debrief. So actually allowing time in the group to talk about that disagreement that we've just had today in this meeting. Before we finish the meeting today, would people like to talk about how we handled that as a group? Do people want to speak about it? Giving people the opportunity to do that in the group. Also, it might be necessary for the group leader to do that outside the group, and perhaps at the next meeting acknowledge and recognise that there were disagreements and talk about how that might be handled next time. In talking about conflict in a group, I'm also again aware that this is a very big part of group work, and we're just pulling out some of the key points around that. The setting and the circumstances for the group is going to influence the way in which the group leader or the facilitator handles that. Clarifying and summarising discussion and options in the group can be really helpful, that's something that the group leader should be doing constantly. Really important also that the group leader or facilitator themselves remains calm and neutral during any conflict. So even if as a group leader you want to side with someone or you agree more with one person than you do with another, it's really important as a group leader and a facilitator to remain neutral and to allow different viewpoints to be expressed without siding one or the other. And the solutions to how that conflict will be managed will differ entirely according to the group, the situation, the task, and there can be circumstances where a conflict may not be easily resolved within the group, and sometimes, it doesn't happen often, but sometimes a mediator who's an outside person may be asked to come in and to assist the group to resolve that conflict. Slide 20 has just a couple of scenarios for you to think about. These are all based on real examples that happen in different settings where task groups people have experienced conflict in them. The first one is a team meeting in an organisation where two colleagues start disagreeing with each other. Another situation is at a community planning meeting, some of the residents in that planning meeting actually start arguing with the facilitator. And another scenario is at an interagency network meeting, so a meeting that's bringing together people from different organisations. The people at the meeting start arguing with the worker as the facilitator about the purpose of the meeting. All of these scenarios are based on situations that occur all the time, and what I would like you to do is think about how do you think you would respond to those very different situations. And sometimes the disagreeing, a couple of colleagues disagreeing with each other, it might not be that significant, but when you notice there's some conflict in a group, how you respond even to a minor tension is really important, because if you ignore it, it may very well erupt or bubble along and become a bigger issue further down the track. Next week, Module 4, we're going to be looking further at group dynamics, and then particularly looking at how leadership and our own leadership style comes into that. Thank you.